In 2008, Kick-Ass, a comic book by Mark Millar and John Romita Jr. was published. The comic was pretty good, and the movie adaptation a couple years later, directed by the master Matthew Vaughn, was a literal masterpiece. But that's for another day. So Mark did something, I don't know if you want to call it revolutionary, but it wasn't something I personally see happen before. He auctioned off the name of his title character, with all proceeds going to charity. Now this here is a win-win for everyone. He gets to hype up his comic, which makes sense, with the added bonus of benefiting some charity. I think it was for Scottish schools or something, I could be wrong. Regardless, he wasn't pocketing this money and he was actually doing some good with it. Plus, you get your fan base excited. So Dave Luzuski it was. That's the name of the guy who won the auction for a couple $1,000s, I guess. So 2 years later, in 2010, Nemesis was announced, and with art by the awesome Steve McNiven. Now I was particularly excited because Kick-Ass was an awesome book. And Mark once again decided to auction off the lead character's name in this new book. I looked up as much as I could on the comic. Alright, costume looks awesome. Okay, it's a bad guy, bummer. The whole premise was, in quoting Mark, what if Batman was a total dick? The actual word he used was far worse. Basically, you have this billionaire who decides to use his money to be a bad guy. Think the complete opposite of Bruce Wayne. Cool premise, right? So I guess if I won the auction, I'd be immortalized as a bad guy. Not ideal, but it took me about 10 seconds and I got over that. I found the auction on eBay. Then I had to get the wife's permission just because. If you're married, you'll understand why. So she asks, how much are we talking about here? Without a blink, because I obviously wanted it to sound normal, $20,000. Surprisingly, she was okay with it. So thankfully, I got past the hardest part of this whole effort, which is getting my wife's permission. So here I am, an hour before the auction, and I was pretty certain the average comic book fan won't pay $20,000 to get their name immortalized in some comic book that may or may not be optioned as a movie. I would love to see Mark Millar's face when he finds out the guy with the name Ahmed won the auction. Yeah, that'll totally mess up all his plans. He'll have to rewrite the backstory. Of course, I had faith in Mark. So yeah, he would have been pissed a bit, but I was absolutely certain he would have figured out how to make the story work with his lead character having some Middle Eastern name. So here I am, waiting for the auction, and decide to keep searching for previews. Then I stumble upon the 6-page preview. Then I see this, a building being blown up. So my mind literally starts racing. I mean, if this gets made into a movie with my full name and you have an Ahmed blowing up a building, I mean, my people get enough grief about terrorism as it is. I could handle being a fictional terrorist, but there are serious geopolitical forces here beyond my control. So a few minutes before the auction, I made the hard choice to back out. So that's my story of how Mark Millar fucked up my plan to fuck up his plan.